our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Pray be seated. This parliament now commences. Honorable Dr. Mitchell, just turn your light off. Dr. Mitchell, because of where this thing is, you can leave your mic on, because I sense reaching the switch from where you stand might be a challenge. Yes, so you can. You're right. That's okay because of the podium that you have, the podium in front of you. All right. Honorable members, we would not waste any time, just to say that for today's session, just to remind the Honorable House that it will be a brief session as we try to pay respect to the late Honorable Adrian Mitchell. For the purpose of today's debate, we will have the response from the Leader of the Opposition, Dr. Keith Mitchell. He will be given 2 hours to speak maximum. I indicated to the House in our last sitting that we now have a digital clock at the entry there on the wall. So this will be used to time the speakers. My suggestion to the clerk is that when you are 10 minutes away from your due time, he gives a jingle so that members know I'm 10 minutes away so that they can plan the wrap-up. All right? And that's basically it today. I now invite the Leader of the Opposition, Honorable Dr. Keith Mitchell, to make his contribution.
Mr. Speaker, I just want to add that be aware that if I'm interrupted, then that time cannot be part of the closure. I hope I'm not interrupted like by the Minister of Finance, who's giving me his full time. If any interruption took place, it was one of his members who were clapping spontaneously. Mr. Speaker, I stand here today with a very heavy heart, as I'm forced to decide to respond to the national budget presentation on the same day that I have been asked to do a special tribute for my former colleague and special friend, Adrian Spaceman Mitchell. Mr. Speaker, we are asked to have a minute of silence on Monday as a mark of respect for Adrian, which I thought was not fitting enough for his contribution to this Parliament and this country. Instead, Mr. Speaker, we should have honored him by not having this session here today, in addition to the minutes of silence. Mr. Speaker, in that sense, therefore, I was asked by the family to be there with them this morning, but I had to not accept that. I'll tell him I'll be there as soon as possible. So expect me to leave here immediately after my presentation. Out of respect for someone who has served this parliament and given a service to this country, politics should take second place, Mr. Speaker. This brings me into focus, Mr. Speaker, how this government has operated the business of this House since the last general elections. The present government seems to believe that they can manage the business of this House at their whims and fancy, not at the wishes of the people of this beautiful land of ours. A case in point, Mr. Speaker. After receiving the schedule of the House meetings, which included the dates for the Finance Committee and the budget presentation, the members on this side of the House did not object. We weren't consulted, but we did not object. This meant that the finance would have been held on November 17th, as was announced, and the national budget on the 8th of December. As our team arranged our schedule based on scheduled duties, personal and otherwise, without the consultation, the date of the Finance Committee meeting was changed from November 13th to November 17th, to the 13th. I assume to accommodate ministers of government and whatever purposes that they are at their disposal to do. It was also announced, Mr. Speaker, at a press conference. The benefit of the House of Members were not first given. I received no communication at all as the leader of the opposition, and I asked members, they did not receive any. Mr. Speaker, therefore, whether it is the wasteful spending on travel and other matters, the massive increases in emoluments given to ministers of government, the lack of engagement with trade unions and other social partners, or the signing of documents that impact on the social economic life of the people of this land, the story is still the same. It is the same. I will, in the course of this presentation, Mr. Speaker, demonstrate how this arrogance, the self-interest and ego in government has been the order of the day. The word empathy is absent from those who govern and lead this country, particularly the head of that particular government. Mr. Speaker, this debate on the estimates of expenditure and revenue 2024 is occurring at a critical period in this land of ours. There can be no doubt that the systematic impact of COVID recovery, the supply side disruptions, the blowback of wars that we cannot understand, and the catastrophic effects of climate change have left the global environment more uncertain, less forgiving, and harsher. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, the budget debate 2024 is occurring at a time when the Grenadian economy has already begun to display clear signs of slowdown, with real GDP between 3 and 3.6% over the next 2 years. Yet, Mr. Speaker, on Monday, December 4th, 2023, Grenada experienced a historic moment in this land of ours. Indeed, it may well have been the first budget, in my experience, where the Minister of Finance did not convince himself first before failing so miserably to convince this owner of a house and the Grenadian population that what he was given to read was indeed credible, Mr. Speaker. What this house and the population was subjected to on Monday was a disjointed, inarticulate, rambling, confused journal of the NDC first year and a half in government, which focused entirely on the successful programs that the NNP established and initiated, while at the same time attempting to malign the previous NNP government. They did not have the conscience to say it was NNP who did this. But the people not sleeping and the God is not sleeping. Mr. Speaker, we did have a presentation, you know, but there was no budget. In the manner that the parliamentary process in this country have come to anticipate as the father of the house understand over the years. First, this government is first and first. And Mr. Speaker, in that presentation on Monday, every once in a while, the Minister of Finance monologued. And then keep saying the NNP excellent track of record that we know it was for economic stewardship was introduced, as he said, but it was followed by some bites, such as, and I quote, they said we couldn't do it, or what we did in a year and a half, they couldn't do it in decades. Followed by the minister describing and lauding, don't disturb me, give me a chance, you had your chance. The successful NNP programs, which the NDC has the good fortune to inherit, and should have even had a better sense to keep it all, Mr. Speaker. Clap. Mr. Speaker, it appeared that at least the Minister of Finance himself was aware that he was taking one for the team, because this was truly a new low in the history of presentation of estimates of revenue and expenditure as we know it. So after 1.5 hour and 47 minutes, the entire country, and we sitting here and others, would have been asking, when will he start going into the 2024 budget? And then, just then, Mr. Speaker, just so, I heard the words. And then Mr. Speaker started saying, calling out acknowledgements. He was beginning to end this presentation, Mr. Speaker. What a tragedy. We were all stunned by the announcement, therefore, later on, after the budget was presented and the minister would have got a chance to announce all the nice things he wants to announce, because that is his day. There were announcements after a special meeting, I understand, that public officers will now get a 25% salary increase as a payment, a one-off payment, Mr. Speaker. This shows, Mr. Speaker, that the government was in panic mode after the dismal presentation, Mr. Speaker. That's a fact. You don't make an announcement like this just after your best time to announce. I was having fun, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on the issue of climate change and the recently concluded COP28, Mr. Speaker, Grenada for several years played a determining role. Mr. Speaker, Grenada was chairman of the small states for years and led a number of important initiatives for small states throughout the world. And Grenada played a role in determining the importance of the global climate negotiations. We We are therefore encouraged by the achievements of the global community and small states specifically at COP28, particularly in the achievement of the Loss and Damage Fund. This Loss and Damage Fund will go a long way in re-risking, alleviating, and building climate resilience among communities impacted by climate change. We therefore look forward to the implementation of the Loss and Damage Fund. And we continue to call for broader, decisive action on climate change. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, the recent amendments to the Fiscal Responsibility Act and other laws by this administration have stifled the creation of adequate buffers necessary to complement the external climate and other financing. Would certainly stifle it. You may recall, Mr. Speaker, the amendment made to the Transformational Fund regulations, reducing the contingency fund from 40% to 10% earlier this year, Mr. Speaker. And they claim they're making a lot of revenue and CBI doing so well. But you're reducing the contingency fund, so to speak. Mr. Speaker, when Hurricanes Ivan and Emily destroyed our country in 2004 and 2005, we had little or no saving to use in the rebuilding process. And we were heavily reliant on loans and support and being beggars for the international community, the donors and friendly governments. We were on our knees. We had no savings. We are therefore urged, and we agreed to have an appropriate saving for future disasters. This we did, as this government itself admitted that they met a pregnant treasury when they got into office. So the impression given by this government that we had no money for contingency is misleading, very misleading. The Minister of Finance must know, and those who lead him must know, that all monies in the Treasury are under the umbrella of the consolidated fund. It doesn't matter whether it's contingency fund or special fund. That's where it is. And you said you met it pregnant. Get it right. Can't have your cake and eat it at the same time. Words are good for lawyers. Mathematicians think differently, Mr. Speaker. Sorry. Brother Peter. Mr. Speaker, some things slip out sometimes. Mr. Speaker, as we examine the estimates of revenue, let's get back to serious business, Mr. Speaker. As we examine the estimates of revenue and expenditure for 2024, in the context of dynamic changes and developments, some of which were referred to by the government side, and also within the context of the programs and projects initiated by the new National Party's government. We are left with one burning question, Mr. Speaker. Whose interest does this budget seek to advance? That is the question people would ask. Whose interest this budget seeks to advance? Mr. Speaker, I know, and those who want to pretend otherwise, for whatever reasons, let them go do it. But the ground speaks. There is a level of frustration sitting there in the ground among the youth and vulnerable groups in our country today. That's a fact. And that is quite concerning for those who care and those who have empathy, like members on this side of the House. And I can't say none on the other side. But let the heart stick where it fits. painting the country in black and white with a tinted landscaping for social media likes, throwing up 3D model labeled coming soon. The aircraft coming soon. It's not governing a country, Mr. Speaker. That's not governing a country, Mr. Speaker. PR, pictures, videos, that is what we have to eat, Mr. Speaker. These are the jobs we are getting. The PR, the PR. The failure of this government to solidly roll out any new initiatives is obvious in the debate and implementation of projects that they met in place, some of which they took stop for a long while, thereby affecting jobs. Some of them have not even restarted, like River Road and other places. Mr. Speaker, the youth, the single mothers, the farmers, the market vendors, for example, those who were moved from Queen's Park, the bus operators and owners, the poor road workers, Mr. Speaker, the most vulnerable group, the working poor and the vulnerable have been waiting to hear concrete steps towards achieving the so-called transformational agenda. Big words. And after the hodgepodge presentation we had Monday, they too realized, Mr. Speaker, that nothing transformative is being offered for their lives going forward. Words, words, words. In fact, the government's medium-term expenditure objectives now states that the government's transformational agenda will kick into high gear during 2024 to 2026. After almost 2 years, it's now getting to put the gear in place, Mr. Speaker. The gearbox is stuck, Mr. Speaker. It's now going to 2024. So when 2024 comes, they say you're going to get up 2025, 2027. Think it's so? Fool people. Think you can fool people? There is little or no new initiative being advanced in the forward estimate of the government presented. No new initiatives that we can say realistically will come into effect in this period. Because what couple new two ones I saw, that ain't going anywhere for a while, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, therefore, we await this elusive agenda of transformation. And while we await this, the World Food Programme recent statistics highlight that food insecurity is a growing challenge for our people, and that the situation has deteriorated over the past year. Mr. Speaker, it is hard not to notice that even as food inflation is at a high, agricultural production, Mr. Speaker, particularly non-traditional agriculture, is at its lowest. Mr. Speaker, I am clear that the agricultural sector is certainly broken. It is broken, Mr. Speaker. And I'm not saying it is broken just so now. This is a problem that we have to come to terms with. Indeed, I must say also that it has never been so bad, Mr. Speaker. Farmers are disillusioned. They are bawling out for mercy. But if you're talking to someone or persons that who have no empathy, cannot feel the pain, who's thinking politics, scoring and scoring, then farmers, nothing new will come, because they can't change who they are. Their DNA is already set, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Grenadians cannot receive basic medicines at the hospital. And the low morale of staff is obvious. And I'm not saying it was ever perfect. I'm not saying it was so great on the NNP. Don't ever get me wrong. Because one thing I do is always admit my mistakes. Well, you could laugh. Laugh when people suffering. Laugh when they have no medication. You can laugh. It's a joke. Yes, it's a joke. I feel that pain, Mr. Speaker. You can laugh. While the people hurt, laugh. Ask the nurses. Ask the orderlies. The doctors, the cooks, the security guards, and other ancillary staff at the medical facility. Sometimes when you feel pain, you laugh, you don't even know what you're laughing. You know, Mr. Speaker. Our country's reputation, Mr. Speaker, for peace and tranquility, and our low crime status are major sources of competitive strength in the areas of private education and tourism and development as a whole. Mr. Speaker, gun-related crime and violence, in fact, all crimes and violence are also a major threat to the peace and security of all our people. The crime situation is an imminent threat to the country as the Minister of National Security and Prime Minister continues to systematically dismantle the police force and lower the morale of the force. The failure to promote officers based on established policies and the motion of others because of what is perceived the political alignment has created an atmosphere of discord in the police force. Moreover, the continuous transfers, the semantics on advancing promise, pay, and grade, all sorts of dancing. The meager duty allowance to the rank and file of the force, and the sluggish approach to treating repairs of police stations have cumulatively resulted in a demotivated Royal Grenada Police Force that has to be arrested quickly. The frustration is evident in a number of officers who have already opted to take early retirement, and from information, many more intend to do so. We have to arrest the situation, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the challenges facing existing officers would affect the new recruits that are entering with a mere sometimes 4 weeks training stint. How, Mr. Speaker, how prepared will these officers be to protect and serve as the oath demands? So if they do not come up to what we believe in, then we run our mouths, when in fact we did not give them the necessary tools to do so. 4 weeks training in some cases. Mr. Speaker, the security of this country is at stake. And we take this opportunity to call on the government to urgently arrest this situation. It's not about just each of us here. It's about all the citizens of the country. Mr. Speaker, these are the prevailing circumstances in which the citizens of Grenada look to the policies and programs of the government in any given budgetary cycle for relief and opportunities. These are what we are looking for, not thumping of the chest and boasting about the bi-monthly payment program of public officers. In some cases, it kind of, it's kind of frightening. Bi-monthly payment what has left many officers at the end of the period when it's supposed to come without a salary because the situation is broken. You should listen to that first. Not the payout of retroactive pension also to less than 1% of the population, while crucial social programs have been cut. No empathy, no conscience. Me and me and me, how I look, how I think, how I think. Mr. Speaker, this budget cycle is cast in the context of hyperinflation. You know, Mr. Speaker, they can't keep quiet. I was very quiet when they were speaking. They can't. They can't. But I understand. When you're uncomfortable, you talk sometimes like a baby. In the context of hyperinflation, contracted growth, increased crime and violence, an unacceptable high youth unemployment, and a largely vulnerable working class, this is the order of the day, Mr. Speaker. The budget read on Monday presents no response to the vulnerable segments of the population, to the runaway inflation which averages 8.7% for food, but exceeds 15% on some food products. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, after the reading of the budget, the growing segment of the population that comprises the working poor now knows for sure that none of the harsh conditions that afflict their lives will be transformed for the better. They know that. It is therefore necessary, Mr. Speaker, to evaluate the extent to which the revenues that are expected to be generated are allocated to the areas that are affecting the people of this country. I will so do. Mr. Speaker, I want to speak directly to the revenue performance now, which is touted as a significant achievement by this government. Mr. Speaker, you know when I see numbers, it turns me on. With an increase in the price of the item of 8.7%, the average inflation cited by the government itself for food, the government will collect roughly, a 10% increase in customs revenue. Now, a couple of things validate this analysis. First, emerging out of the pandemic, consumption patterns would have already been adjusted. What that means, Mr. Speaker, is the price increases will increase tax revenue, although consumption could have dropped, Mr. Speaker. As such, inflation is what accounts for a significant part of the increase in revenue collections. That is an appropriate conclusion, a deduction. So yes, Mr. Speaker, revenues are up. We see the numbers. On domestic taxes, Mr. Speaker, the government reintroduced VAT on electricity, knowing the pain that already existed. It reintroduced the petrol tax on gas and petroleum products. It placed a 15% VAT on sugar and sugar drinks. All products that you know the poorest of the poor use. That is the point I'm making, you know. The poorest of the poor use this, but didn't enter the minds or the feelings of the heart. This so-called heart, the heart, it didn't enter that heart. That heart is a painful heart. Yes, excise taxes, I'm talking about increasing revenues. I don't want to lose the trend. Excise taxes on alcohol. Increased license fees for road users. But also again, they impose a charge on water. Water, you know, Mr. Speaker, water, basic service, Mr. Speaker. All of this, Mr. Speaker, are serious revenue enhancement measures. So when they're boasting, the boast came with the pain of the most ordinary people in the society. Additionally, the government has provided an amnesty to encourage taxpayers who owe taxes to take advantage of the tax break. When we consider all those things, Mr. Speaker, together, the revenue performance must be seen as a combination of price effect of inflation, the imposition of taxes on the people, in particular the poorest of the poor in this country, and also of past as well as 20. The buoyant revenue performance, therefore, Mr. Speaker, has masked the underperformance of the economy. That is because of the management of the economy. So, Mr. Speaker, this is while we are broadly of support of most of the conclusions of the IMF staff report, Mr. Speaker, staff, because I did work for the IMF in my early days in Washington. So I know how they behave, how they think. I have a good idea. We found the staff report, although we say we basically agreed with any of the statements, but we found it uncharacteristically hollow. Note I didn't use the word shallow. It was just not as piercing as we have come to expect an IMF report. But that is not surprising, Mr. Speaker, because the staff report came out of staff members from the IMF meeting with the government side alone. Bear in mind, and that is significant. They did not get any independent view. So what they write is based on what they receive. As such, therefore, Mr. Speaker, we look forward to Article 4 consultation of the fund that is called for the second quarter of 2024, where they would engage with all stakeholders, with government, with trade unions, with business sector, with the NGOs and the official opposition. That is the Article 4 consultation. And that report, Mr. Speaker, afterwards will tell us the real picture, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding the excess revenues earned and projected to be earned by this government, the areas of increased allocation or distribution of the same, it demonstrates, Mr. Speaker, apparent lack of sensitivity of policies and programs that would generate jobs for the average Grenadians. And that is fueled by self-interest, Mr. Speaker. No empathy, no feelings, that heart. Mr. Speaker, projections for 2024 relative to what was spent in 2023 reflect an increase in capital and recurrent expenditure by listening numbers, Mr. Speaker, by 7% and 32% respectively. In normal trends, Mr. Speaker, you expect to see a low increase in recurrent expenditure and a high increase in capital expenditure, Mr. Speaker. The complete reverse, because through the capital, you see a lot of things for yourself and the country. Mr. Speaker, a mere 7% increase in expenditure on capital projects for 2024 speaks to the economic growth prospects of this country. Everything is correlated. It's not verbal language that you see, or someone coming on TV or radio and talking without any basic knowledge of what is taking place. It is a correlation of what is happening at all fronts, the multivariate situation, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this government is enjoying record passport sales to the Russians, while the Minister of Finance and Prime Minister, the Special Envoy for Investment, and the Treasurer of the National Democratic Congress, they're happy. But not a single new investment project has come to Grenada during that time, Mr. Speaker. Not a single one. All you're hearing about the regurgitated NMP projects. And while they're saying so, Mr. Speaker, the attack goes on. This government has sold more passports to Russia in 3 months than the New National Party's government did in a whole year, Mr. Speaker. That is significant. Mr. Speaker, and during the time of the projects, we could see, although they're touting them now as if it's their projects, Range 6 Sense, the Intercontinental, the Beach House, Libera, and Mount Hartman, just to name a few. All projects that are working, give us credit, man. Give us, Mr. Speaker. Give us credit. We're not children, therefore we're not going to jump up and... Mr. Speaker, to date, this government has not brought a single new CBI project. But they gave $22 million US of the hard-earned taxpayers' dollars to a man who invested only 18 million US EC dollars in Grenada, Carriacou, and Petite Martinique. 22 million US dollars, you know what that could do for the average man in the country? You know how much road work at Christmas time that people could be doing business and making Christmas more exciting and happier times. But one man is enjoying himself in Miami, Mr. Speaker. This is only the tip of the spending iceberg on this project. Mr. Speaker, and the minister was bold-faced enough to tell us that we could have cost us over $100 million if we stayed the course. Mr. Speaker, the fact is, if we had done what we did, we would have to pay the man a cent, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you will hear a lot more of this because we have the details and we have all the information and the data to support what we say. Mr. Speaker, the minister failed to tell us that there were investors in this project, so the government could be called upon to pay $56 million US to investors on this project. We didn't hear a word about that. We didn't hear about Kawana Bay and some project, Silver Sands owners. Thing not even completed yet, but it's out there as if it's final. But that is how this government operates. Noise, announcement, soon to come. Mr. Speaker, with no new major private sector investment on the horizon, the capital spending of the government would be largely expected to drive economic activity, because the government itself, from its numbers, says 7% increase in capital from the work that they're doing. When you compare the expenditure, only 7%. So most of the activity has to come from the capital project, most of them are NNP. Give NNP the praise. The 7% increase in expenditure is largely attributed also, and that's a fact, numbers again, Mr. Speaker. It's largely attributed to increased cost of building materials, and that's a fact. And the so-called two new projects were added to the list of the inherited ones from the New National Party's administration. Further, Mr. Speaker, there is no guarantee that these two projects will get going during this budget period. So if so, and whether the conditions will be beneficial to the people of this country. While some of the existing projects were renamed, for instance, words, Mr. Speaker, they're changing everything. The bathroom and toilet program now become WASH. WASH, yes, transformation words, Mr. Speaker. They're good at words. You get 100% on words, 0 for implementation and project implementation. 0. We want percentages and performance benefiting people. That's the mark of a government, not words, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, so that one's washed. The debushing program of now is called what? Beautification, empowerment, sustainability, and transformation. Whoa, words, Mr. Speaker, what? Or special projects, they call it now. Community mobilization, empowerment, and transformation. Woo, words, Mr. Speaker, more words. And two new, Mr. Speaker, this is fun, almost fun if it was not people that we're dealing with. We could be laughing, but it's difficult to do so. Mr. Speaker, this so-called young, bright, I don't know where it is, and creative transformers, I don't see them on the transformation. And that transformation tree that we have about. It has failed to come up with any original ideas that we can create job opportunities for the people. Where are these transformers except words? It is therefore anticipated that 2024 will be another year of continuation of projects initiated by the new National Party's government. I expect to see more of this on social media posts about implementation rates and all sorts of things, where they get the numbers. And coming soon, that quote, coming soon, flight landing, rather than project initiation and performance activities. However, Mr. Speaker, we always give credit where credit is due. We commend the express intent of the budget to continue these projects and encourage the government to give accelerated implementation consideration to the Molyneux Landship, and issues affecting the Western Corridor and community of River Road. Mr. Speaker, Molyneux. Poor Molyneux, hold on. Recurrent expenditure, Mr. Speaker. We were hopeful that the rate of increase in recurrent expenditure would have been utilized to assist the people of Grenada, Carriacou, and Petite Martinique in some key areas of concern. However, we continue to see the lack of empathy, sensitivity, the cold-heartedness, and the incompetence of this government. When you see them speak, you don't see no feelings. Words, Mr. Speaker. And incompetence in several critical areas: education, healthcare, housing, social services, seed and debushing, the youth area, agriculture, and efforts relative to inflation. Education, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the government touted its free tuition, quote unquote, free tuition program as a major success. We all know, Mr. Speaker, that schools in Grenada, with the exception of the T.A. Marischal Community College, Life Organization, and private educational facilities do not have a tuition fee per se, as I say, generally speaking, but rather fees for things like report cards and a tie and the likes and other amenities, Mr. Speaker. As a matter of fact, schools across Grenada still charge parents for these things in 2023, and it appears that they will be charging them so in 2024 unless I hear something different. On the issue of TAMCC and Neuro, while tuition is paid as a one-off charge per semester, the transportation support provided by the previous government, Mr. Speaker, particularly for students in the rural communities, was reduced by $1.2 million Mr. Speaker. I say I like numbers. Of 50%. Check your records. Mr. Speaker, this so-called free tuition deceptive headline that education in Grenada is now free. Absolute nonsense. While we have children who are unable to access the same because it's a facade. Students from the rural community, Mr. Speaker, attending St. George's University, Mr. Speaker, were also assisted by this program that we had. Moreover, there was a cut in the allocation for the e-books program in the schools. That is in the budget. Mr. Speaker, one would think that a government that wears the term transformation as a running theme in every word that they utter. As I say, they're good at words, words only. Would have embraced the e-book program, but instead there is a $5.5 million reduction in the support provided for that program by the former New National Party's government. Check the numbers. It takes a special level of insensitivity, Mr. Speaker, in a period of hyperinflation to reduce the needed support in this area, as without the tools to facilitate students' learning, then to me, therefore, this so-called tuition support is useless. Mr. Speaker, I was on record, Mr. Speaker, as standing firm when the last government, NDC government in 2008, announced that it was giving free tuition to all and sundry, and they removed the transportation cost and other basic amenities and support that we gave to the vulnerable and the poor, which the other side don't like to hear me use the word poor. Mr. Speaker, I stood up then, and even some members of my own party did not agree with me because they felt that people would be turning against us for this. But sometimes in leadership, you have to speak your conscience, even at the expense, Mr. Speaker, of the loss of some votes. I said, the country does not have a wash of money. And if we were able to have a lot of money, excess, and we could give everybody free tuition, I say, let's do it. But under the prevailing condition, I said, those who can afford to pay must pay. And use that money to provide additional help to the poor and vulnerable for transportation and other amenities. These were my words. And this again is the same stand that I take. Those of us in a position like your son, I'm doing well, are you doing well? I can pay for him, let me pay. Let you pay. Government should not pay for us if it doesn't have. If it has, I said, if it has a lot of money, then fine. Mr. Speaker, the reduction in transportation allowance and book support, just to create to highlight free tuition for all. It hinders students from lesser means from accessing an education. This in turn widens the margin between the vulnerable families and those who can afford it. Those who know it, like me and others, how it felt going to school and not having basic things at Presentation College, not being able to go to the talk shop to buy a sugar cake. I know how it felt when I watched others drinking and eating, and I could not buy anything. I would assume all members on this side would have passed through this. And I can only assume all members on the other side, but some of them do not behave as if they passed through difficult times because they hate to the word poor. While we are concerned, Mr. Speaker, we are not surprised because we saw the same lack of sensitivity to the poor and vulnerable people by the policy decisions of the NDC government in 2008. So they have taking a pattern, Mr. Speaker. Their policies have always supported the concept of taking from the less fortunate and giving to those who can help themselves. That has been the mantra. So, Mr. Speaker, while we boast of increased revenues, the failure to use those revenues in key areas of education to benefit the people of Grenada who need it most is extremely unfortunate. Healthcare, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister and then Minister of Finance, when he delivered the 2023 budget speech, labeled the healthcare budget of 2023 as the biggest budget in the history of Grenada. Numbers. In fact, healthcare was considered by him, and I wouldn't fault him for saying so, the number one priority of the government and a critical aspect of its transformational agenda. These were almost quotes. With the highest allocation in the history of this country, it is therefore baffling, Mr. Speaker, that the estimates reflect an unspent amount of $27 million, Mr. Speaker. That's the government. Big numbers in a block. You put a big number in a block, and then you boast it in the budget. The numbers mean nothing if it does not go to the heart of meeting the aspirations and wills of the people of this country, particularly those on the ground, Mr. Speaker. It is therefore baffling, Mr. Speaker, that while this large amount unspent, we lack basic medication at our healthcare facilities. The story is wide, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, imagine $27 million would be left unspent while nurses are paid a taxed amount of $500 so they could remain silent on the issue of promised regularization. They remain silent. Don't talk. Don't say nothing. I'll give you $500. Take it. Behave yourself. As the government actively entertained privatization talks with venture capitalists, and there's nothing wrong with the discussion. Everyone will recall, Mr. Speaker, the nurses hitting the streets during the period of the new National Party's government as they felt our phased approach to regularization was not at the pace that they desired. While that may be so, we never stopped regularization. Mr. Speaker, the option for privatization of the healthcare was proposed to the new National Party's administration, and discussion was ongoing. However, one of the base concerns was the cost of services to the people under such an arrangement. We have to be satisfied with health care being a public good. That was of paramount concern to us, Mr. Speaker, and I could only assume that it will be a paramount concern to the government. But I watch. Moreover, the implications for workers and the costs associated with the same were also worrying, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you do not have to take my word for it. Just ask the leadership of the Public Workers Union, trade union, who exposed the notion of privatization of the healthcare system and it concerns, not necessarily against, but concerns. And consider his words, Mr. Speaker, when he said, he has gone on record highlighting that healthcare is worse today than it was during the period of the new National Party's government. And these statements are coming from a person who never wasted the time to criticize the new National Party's government. Even when we won 15 seats, the brother was on television the next morning attacking him before we started to work in 2018. That was his right. We weren't agreeing with him, but we did not say a word. Ask the many mothers who have lost babies at the healthcare facilities. Speak to the families who have lost loved ones due to the routine procedures. Or better yet, ask your activist in St. Patrick's West who fell and broke his jaw in 5 different places and was left unattended for 3 days, Mr. Speaker. Empathy, care, love. Mr. Speaker, this government, in all the words we have heard on Monday, will add $3.4 million to the healthcare budget, so they add more, although they didn't spend $27 million. Adding $3.4 million, making this one of the largest in history. Make no mistake. We anticipate the same results. The leadership of the policy level of the Ministry of Health is woefully inadequate, and everyone knows it. But it's also a reflection of the entire government, generally speaking. I can't say all, I'm always careful to say all, because I know some of them. Instead of minding the business of the healthcare system, the Minister of Health is busy erecting signs in Northwestern Georgias, and somebody member asked me, Doc, how is Northwest? Northwest is well, my brother, and it will always be well. Erecting signs and delivering sporting balls while the people are hurting and dying at the General Hospital, Mr. Speaker. But I don't want to make this a question of personalities. So while I advocate and concerns for the leadership, I caution the government on the issues of privatization. The caution, as we must consider the nature of healthcare as a public good. Housing and social services. Yes. Mr. Speaker, this government has budgeted $9 million for Project 500. One of the new ideas coming from the government, and we applaud them for at least thinking about something. I thought you guys lost your brains, but it seems like you had some. However, Mr. Speaker, if you are able to take one from what happened, if you could take a cue from what has happened, Mr. Speaker, with the free housing units donated by the People's Republic of China, and the utterances of the Prime Minister in one of his many galas. Fet. It is well recorded that these houses are not intended for the low and no income people. You tell him go to a bank, no income, forget it. The mere fact that this category of persons were asked to approach a financial institution to secure a loan to make upfront payments for housing units that were donated by the government and people of China through our initiative and NNP government, and sadly so to the late brother Elvin Nimrod, who were a key person in those discussions. One can naturally expect that the houses that are to be built by this government will not be targeting these poor people. That is the DNA of this government, unless those who decide to have a conscience have the day. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, Grenadians at a National Democratic Congress political party function in the diaspora were encouraged to invest in those homes. Nothing's wrong with that. Accordingly, the allocation made in the 2024 budget is not intended to fill only the housing needs of people on the ground who have no homes. But you might be thinking of others who might be better off in some cases. I can't say all cases, Mr. Speaker. But it also can be channeled to party hawks, Mr. Speaker. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, the amount of funds usually spent on the housing brigade, this housing brigade, is now referred to by this government, what? The Grenada Home Improvement and Resilient Project. Words, words. We have a simple, we simple people, we say housing repair. But big words, man. Tie up the head with words. The lawyer speaking. Good in the court, not here. It has been reduced by $1 million, Mr. Speaker. $1 million. Accordingly, we anticipate fewer people being assisted by the house repair program. Mr. Speaker, it's often said by members of this government that the new National Party is fixated on the poor and vulnerable or the people on the margins. Mr. Speaker, we make no apologies for this fixation because part of the prevailing philosophy of the new National Party is to create an enabling environment for everyone to strive. But there must be a special focus on the poor and vulnerable. Mr. Speaker, I commend, therefore, the relentless efforts of all the voices in this country who have consistently called on the government to have a heart and return the 150 to the seed beneficiaries. They made a call for a year and a half. The government has now, after a year and a half, have made a payment to increase this year of 200. And they want people to be happy, to applaud, after suffering the people and taking bread from their mouths for 18 months. You're now saying, be happy, Daddy is here. Papa is here, the Jefe is here, with a top-up of only $50. Over inflation and other periods, and the strain and stress and medical problems could have been created with the loss of this 150. What is $200, Mr. Speaker? Give them the 650 that you said in opposition was the real number. And I would say you should add even more as a top-up. Empathy, the heart. Mr. Speaker, in the meeting office in 2022, listen to this, Mr. Speaker, numbers again. There were 7,107 beneficiaries on the seed list. Given the inflationary pressures that were prevailing, the new National Party's administration increased the seed by $150 for every household. This policy, they call it tokenism and electioneering. That's what they say. This portion brought the seed cost to the state for the total of $26.6 million. Just listen to the numbers, Mr. Speaker, in 2022. This decision was taken as a cushion and buffer to inflation, food inflation, which remains relatively high. During this year, Mr. Speaker, the Minister for Social Development and Leader of Government Business advised the nation that they have added to the seed beneficiary list. Just listen to the numbers, Mr. Speaker. As a matter of fact, in response to the question posed by myself, the minister informed that there were 7,373 beneficiaries as of April 18, 2023. Numbers don't lie. Words may lie sometimes, but not numbers. That means with an increase of 271 beneficiaries, the seed budget remains $5.6 million less than what was spent during policy position of the new National Party's government. What kind of mathematics is this, Mr. Speaker? When it was 7,107, we spent $26.6 million. You're now bringing it back to that number. You have 7,373 persons, but you know, it's over $5.6 million less. Who fooling who? You have people on the side that can decipher the numbers. Come better, Mr. Speaker. But there is no empathy in the belief. Words. People can drink all words. Mr. Speaker, if we can spend close to $15 million, 7.5 last year and 7 again this year on celebration, your fete. A good portion of it is on fete. Don't tell me otherwise. You can come up with all kinds of gimmicks, but can't fool people. Why can't we help these people to cushion the effects of inflation if we could spend all that money on independence celebration? They would prefer to see it spent on themselves, a good portion, not all, because we must celebrate independence. Why would we cut the support given to the marginalized children and the chronically ill persons who make up 74% of the persons on the SEED program at a time when we are collecting, and they say they're collecting more revenue? Mr. Speaker, this is an orchestrated attack on the marginalized people. I did say so on the first budget, but I was not listened to. More people listening today because they can feel what I said. It's coming to pass. So I call on the government, and particularly the Prime Minister, who knew all what the World Bank said prior to the elections, to provide a minimum of $650 to the SEED beneficiaries. Or better still, we await the promise to eliminate poverty in Grenada, Carriacou, and Peter Matic. Not my words, these are the words of the government. I'd like to see which country will eliminate poverty. US, with all its wealth, hasn't been able to do it. Until such time, Mr. Speaker, we will continue to talk about the poor and vulnerable, no matter how much members on the other side talk otherwise. Mr. Speaker, our NP government has over the years implemented a large debushing program to aid persons without a steady income or permanent jobs, Mr. Speaker. For example, during the Christmas season, sometimes we saw over 6,000 people throughout the length and breadth of the country. Some used to call it like we're wasting money, Mr. Speaker. But you know, Mr. Speaker, you could have seen the circulation of the money all over the country. The vendors in the streets, the farmers, the shopkeepers, the tailors, the hairdressers, all of them, my friends, all of them. You see the money's being spent. People that make large sums of money, generally speaking, don't spend those monies here in the country. There was a complete cutting of this program with $6.7 million cut. This government simply does not care, Mr. Speaker. There is no empathy, and I can qualify my statement. I say some of them. I say most of them, sorry. Mr. Speaker, the new National Party administration, during its period of service, has engaged in at least 6 alternative youth programs in addition to the MANI program. These include Youth Biz, Project Fly, Aspire, Reach, Youth in Agriculture, Empower, and Empower. This project carried a combined portfolio of $57.5 million, Mr. Speaker. And it was from persons, youths in entrepreneurship, to youths who are incarcerated. We did not attempt to leave out anyone whatsoever, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today the government that boasts about having a youthful team, we decide all. No, Mr. Speaker, old man could speak so. The government that boasts about having a youthful team has done the least to support the youths of this country, Mr. Speaker. The only youth programs entered to in the budget for youth are the MANI and the Empower program, with a budget of $41 million, $17.5 million cut in cumulative youth spending. That's the government that loves young people. Notwithstanding this, the inability of the government to come up with innovative programs, transformation word, that engage the youths. They have not added any new persons to the MANI, systematically sending home some, and some cases reducing some by $300. The paycheck is on some of our hands, Mr. Speaker. And they cut the Empower program, this Empower budget by $2.5 million. Mr. Speaker, what has happened to nothing in the budget to the hundreds of children that now graduated. That is what the Imani program was, a continuous program where batches will come in. Not a word about the new batches, not a word, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the nation will recall that the new Prime Minister referred to the 22 budget in the New National Party as one of tokenism. The attempt, he says, to pacify the Imanis, just like what they're doing now. Every time you hear an increase, $500. Just check it. They have a number, like a stock. It doesn't matter what the prevailing variables are. Give them 500. Give them. Keep your mouth shut. Don't say nothing. Like Papa, like Hefe, the greatest man on earth. Mr. Speaker, he says, Mr. Speaker, this is so interesting. This $500, $1,000, it's like it's going to attract tax. And it's subjected to the NIS and cannot be used to compensate for the promise of permanent employment. That was a promise. Mr. Speaker, and with the stroke of a pen, pension and gratuity will come. The pen have a stroke. This $500, Mr. Speaker, is a mere token. The word token came from the other side. I can use it now. It's token to silence people and window dress the real issue that this government is still reimagining the Imani program and is unable to fulfill the promise made by the Prime Minister to make them permanent in 12 months after assuming office. Mr. Speaker, while this government appears to have an obsession with $500, I don't know where they get this 500 thing from. We look forward to making all Imani permanent, Mr. Speaker, and do that urgently. Agriculture. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister and Minister of Finance announced the largest agricultural budget in the last 10 years as he delivered the budget speech in 2023. Like the story of the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Agriculture has only spent $16 million out of $39 million allocation, Mr. Speaker. So you see, the numbers in the budget brackets mean nothing. Just give me a chance to dance and do semantics in the Parliament and other places. But the actual work, and from their own numbers, $16 million alone was spent. Mr. Speaker, with the largest budget and all the nice talk, $23 million remain unspent. Notwithstanding the poor performance of the sector in 2023, there was a near $10 million increase in allocation for 2024, largely driven by the reinstatement of the Youth in Agriculture program that was cut in 2023 budget cycle, and the increased allocation for climate resilience agriculture, for integration landscape management program. All programs, Mr. Speaker, were initiated by the new National Party's administration. While we commend the government for the continuation of these projects, we note with concerns the cuts in the Food Security Enhancement Project, the exportation of agricultural products program, and interestingly, the development of cannabis or marijuana industry projects by $6.5 million, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, ironically, only last weekend we saw a picture circulating with our dear Prime Minister on social media, posing with marijuana, signaling the intent, I assume, to legalize the use of the plant. The extent to which his actions were within the ambit of the laws of Grenada, and that's not for me to conclude on, or can be considered irresponsible, I say to the extent, I would leave it to you, the people, to judge. However, I will say that the picture and the posting of the same was another attempt to deceive the people of Grenada as the budget of the Cannabis Commission was reduced by 40%, Mr. Speaker. We're dealing with numbers, gimmicks, gimmicks, gimmicks. Mr. Speaker, it's unfortunate that food security and supporting the exportation of agricultural products in particular is not a priority for this government. This has implications for the balance of trade, as a reduced allocation in both areas suggests. Mr. Speaker, while we remain concerned about the reduced investment in critical areas, we are more disturbed by the fact that the ministry, with at least 3 advisors, 60% of the funds allocated remains unspent. So what are they doing, I ask? Mr. Speaker, the easing of inflationary pressures. This is an important one. Mr. Speaker, the government has made no serious efforts to utilize some of the resources to ease the food and inflation of the people of this country. Instead, what we have seen is a tax policy position that has resulted in a further burden on the average Grenadian. The removal of the cap on fuel has allowed gas and diesel to be nearly $17 today, Mr. Speaker. These are facts. They took off the cap. The introduction of additional $50 in the license fees across all vehicle types. It has implications for the taximen, bus operators, and owners. We are still grappling with the unmanaged cost of fuel at the pumps. This is likely to have direct implication on bus and taxi fares in 2024. The reinstatement of VAT, environmental levy, and the removal of 25% discount on non-fuel charge on electricity has contributed to increased costs of electricity to 96% of households in Grenada. Mr. Speaker, people are coming every day and showing me the electricity bill. They don't know what has happened, what is going on. Well, I tell them, if you see mine, they would forget me. The imposition of VAT on sugar has affected the poor people that go around selling the sugar cake and other little things, confectionaries. This has affected these ordinary people. And an additional charge on water has negatively affected all of those persons and the farmers and manufacturers who utilize large amounts of water. Mr. Speaker, inflation is one of the single most pressing issues affecting Grenadians. We all understand it. While workers in the public sector settle for 13% over the next 3 years, the real wage of those workers, when considering inflation and increases in NIS, is less than now what it was with the 12% the New National Party gave for the last cycle. That is a fact from the numbers, Mr. Speaker. The government has done nothing to cushion the effects of the cost on working people. The fact that the government advised the regurgitated 20 items that were VAT exempt last year would be placed now on price control suggests that the policy did not work. What is even worse, Mr. Speaker, is that the minister indicated in his announcement that the wholesale and retail markups will be determined after consultations with the industry stakeholders. Words, words. Mr. Speaker, we are in December 2023. This is supposed to take effect at the beginning of the budget in January 2024. And the government has not done any consultation yet. This is Christmas time. I hope you say you're going to do it, or it will be seen as another gimmick. Mr. Speaker, it is without a doubt that the working class purchasing power was more during the reigns of the previous government than it is today. These are just fundamental facts. Mr. Speaker, I now move to self-interest of this government. Mr. Speaker, while the government failed to address some key areas of concern affecting the Grenadian people in this budget cycle, They did not fail to address the needs for themselves, Mr. Speaker. Having recognized the key areas of deficiencies in the pillars of transformation, it is important to evaluate the areas where the increased recurrent funds were allocated for spending and that it was self-serving. Notwithstanding a 31% increased allocation for pension and debt, which are mandatory expenses, it is evident that the government have prioritized most of the increased spending and party loyalists and themselves, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the travel budget of the government has increased by 115% in 2024. Who is it meant to help? The poor people? And it was increased from 2022 to 2023 also. It is no secret that this government runs Grenada from the clouds, Mr. Speaker. Today, the people of Grenada have not seen any tangible benefits from those rendezvous. With an increase in the travel budget for 24, we can only hope that Grenada will benefit beyond the pictures, the videos, the sound bites, the social media pieces cut off, Instagram, and all this, Mr. Speaker. And also, statements on GIS which has become almost a political party station government, Mr. Speaker. I see things on GIS I never saw before. Mr. Speaker, the budgetary allocation for the Ministry of National Security, Home Affairs and Public Administration Information moved from $4 million to $37. A $33 million increase, 825% increase, 825%. This increase is largely attributed to a $27 million allocation for the provision of security contracts to companies of which we can assume are aligned with the National Democratic Congress, since a lot of the hard-working people who were not perceived to be aligned when they came in, they did not renew their contracts. Mr. Speaker, the value of these contracts shows the budget has increased that portion by 41%. Mr. Speaker, I am concerned, and I make a special appeal, therefore, to the people of Grenada to pay particular attention to this development. Mr. Speaker, another act of the government helping themselves at the expense of the state is a deceptive approach taken by this government to increase their own incomes. Note I didn't say salary, incomes. Mr. Speaker, let me make it clear. I register my comments not just as a voice in the political arena, but as a fellow citizen deeply concerned about the direction our beloved nation is taking. As someone who believes in fair and equitable treatment, I am not opposed to parliamentarians receiving a salary or income increase. Make it clear. I have been on record of saying this. But, Mr. Speaker, members of the NNP government and this team can testify whenever this discussion came up, timing, independence of the process, and the amounts were always key points of concern. As a matter of fact, the current government has a 2/3 majority largely because of the desire for more money. On the issue of independence of the process, the new National Party in government, with a 15-seat majority, Mr. Speaker, did not arbitrarily sit in cabinet and decide to increase the income of its members. We did not. We commissioned an independent committee in 2018 to review the salaries of parliamentarians and ministers. And we did so in the 90s when there was the same decision to increase. We did not sit there and appoint ourselves to do what we think and give ourselves what we think we should get. The established committee was made up of sector experts, some of whom are well-known sympathizers of the National Democratic Congress. I don't think there was anyone in that committee, it can be checked, who were known to be a sympathizer of the New National Party. And I just named Henry Joseph, who was also for years the treasurer of the New National Party, and he was named chairman. The National Democratic Congress. Henry will be mad with me, because he would never want to be associated with the NNP. He was chairman, appointed chairman, and he was the treasurer also. And many other members, I wouldn't waste the time to call the other members' names. They recommended some increases, Mr. Speaker. And if you go through what they recommended, even then, and you add inflation, Mr. Speaker, if you go through all of that, it will never come up. It will never come up. I have details of the percentage, but I will not go through that list. It will never come up. I heard people trying to justify that what they came up with would equate to what the government has now decided to give itself. Total falsehood, Mr. Speaker. The numbers do not lie. The numbers are there, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the report was presented for review and a wider consultation in 2019, Mr. Speaker. Of course, it was not available to be incorporated in the 2020 budget cycle. It could have come into supplementary budget, yes, but Mr. Speaker, COVID-19 struck, and the emphasis was not doing things for self, the perception of the population. It was about, Mr. Speaker, taking care of the needs of the people of our land, Mr. Speaker. So we suffer ourselves for the benefit of the population. Therefore, I stand by my previous statements and I strongly maintain my views on this issue, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister claims that he has power and he knows how to use it with a stroke of a pen. So the stroke of a pen, the salaries of ministers were increased. Stroke of a pen. Use power, man. Use it. You get it? Use it. The former government, NDC government head and his team did not know how to use it. I will show them how to use power. I have it. Use it. People use power for all kinds of things, Mr. Speaker. You see it all over the world. To brutalize their citizens. To justify killing babies. That's what they use power for, some. They use power to hurt people, to victimize people, to destroy people's career. It happens all over the world. Power. You must know how to use power. Not for yourself and those you like, but the interests of the people of your beloved land, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this government has deceptively increased its income and sought the House Committee of Parliament. And they try to use the House Committee irresponsibly, Mr. Speaker. Don't try that. Don't try it. You will be called out. Remember who's on this side. The whole team. Mr. Speaker, listen to this. The required process should have been, after an independent committee was established to look at the salaries, the required process should have been for income increase for parliamentarians. That is to form part of the budget. It should first come to the budget committee after the independent committee made its recommendation for ratification, and then to the finance committee meeting for ultimate approval when the budget is sent therefore to the House. That's the process. The income increases, Mr. Speaker, were in the estimate of expenditure that went to the Finance Committee on November 13, 2022, before the House Committee met. Don't try that. After it was already decided by the Finance Committee, what game, Mr. Speaker, is this members playing? Use the House Committee. And every announcement, Mr. Speaker, guess who? And members, Clarice Modeste Cohen and Eminent Pear were members of that committee. That committee's decision was null and void because the Finance Committee already made its decision. And the legal authority says that it goes from Finance Committee to the House. No changes can be made after that, unless you have maybe a special sitting of the Finance Committee. Don't try it. It is important to note that no adjustment could be made to the finance estimate of expenditure and so on after that, Mr. Speaker. Notwithstanding a lack of understanding of parliamentary proceedings, the Finance Committee, which was attended by all members of the government side, approved the following income increases under the Parliamentary Allocation Expenditure Vote 2. All ministers who are members of the House of Representatives or MPs, except the Prime Minister, will receive a 60% increase. Mr. Speaker, $60,000 increase, Mr. Speaker. Overnight, they themselves decided what they should get per year. And this is in addition to the $2,000 they took for themselves. So within a year and a half, their salaries increased by $84,000, Mr. Speaker. And almost all of it, Mr. Speaker, goes without tax because it came under the section called allowances. Mr. Speaker, you see the selfishness? Allowances, no tax. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let me make it clear. The members of Parliament who are not members of the government, they get $5,000. That's what I get, and that's what all of them get. I have no problem with that. If somebody want to criticize me for that, I feel they deserve it, because I was on record of noting that it's not fair that the salaries given to those persons was as little as they were. So that $5,000, I am not, although the process was bad, I still support the $5,000 for the members of Parliament who are not ministers of government. Therefore, it means that the ministers of government who are members of the House of Representatives, in addition to the $3,000 they get on their salaries, will now get an $87,000 increase. Over 106%, even before they settle down to do any serious work in this country, except travel. Bringing the total income of ministers of government, Mr. Speaker, here the number. Despite outside of telephone and internet allowances and so on, the total a minister would get would be $169,687. Oh my, Lord have mercy. Lord have mercy. While the members of Parliament, Mr. Speaker, get the same $5,000, and they have the same responsibility in some cases in terms of meeting the constituents' needs, and they know the challenges that they will get, because every day people come looking for something. So you have a lot. I say it to the people, they're getting a lot of money. So you should have no problem coming to people like me. You know where to go, Mr. Speaker. Similarly, the Parliament has allocated $42,000 increase for ministers who are senators. And that's added to the $24,000 that they were receiving before, and the extra $3,000 ministers get. So the total income has jumped by $71,000. Senators, Mr. Speaker, are happy for you. Now will get, as ministers, $153,000, $153,687, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, none of the previously mentioned adjustment affects the Prime Minister. But the Prime Minister increased his salary by $13,000 per year, bringing his income to $105,218. This does not take into consideration the $246,000 paid for rental of the Prime Minister's residence, which brings his total compensation package, not considering telephone, internet, entertainment, and so on, to $351,218. You see, this former Prime Minister of 23 years, stayed at Mount Royal. It was a home. The taxpayers did not have to pay a cent. I heard someone saying that the government was paying for my home, my house. Tell them stop lying, Mr. Speaker, through you. And I'm not talking to members of this house that said it. It was said outside by some of the party hawks on radio and talk shows. That is false. Just say this. As Prime Minister, therefore, I received $90,000 max, and it was taxed, Mr. Speaker. Get it right. It was taxed. Mr. Speaker, the percentage increases that this government sat in a room and gave themselves in less than 2 years in office, while the people of Grenada was grappling with rising costs and hopelessness, is frightening. Mr. Speaker, I am really saddened. As I said, today was not the day for me to come speak on these issues. I would much prefer another day, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, what is even more frightening, this government came to this House less than a month ago and repealed the Fiscal Responsibility Act and replaced it with the Fiscal Resilience Act. They must change a word, which saw the amendment to the wage bill move from 9% to 13%, because they knew what they were planning in the budget. So they had to change the fiscal rule, otherwise they would be breaking the law. We didn't know that then, but we know it now. The leader of government business, when presenting the bill, lamented the government's interest in providing increases to the workers. He was talking about workers. He did not say anything about himself or other members. However, deceptively, the amendment was made. Listen when it was made, Mr. Speaker. After the public workers were locked into a 3-year increase. But just before the budget to accommodate the increase provided to ministers, in other words, they had to use the fiscal limit in the negotiation with public workers and say, well, you can't expect me to break the law. So they waited, finished the negotiation, and then the increases came, Mr. Speaker. Smart one. Page 31 of the medium-term economic fiscal report that was laid with the budget document highlights the wage bill rule, which is now 9.7%, Mr. Speaker, with increases taken by government ministers. This demonstrates that the amendment was not done to accommodate workers in the medium term. It was to benefit the ministers in government. Mr. Speaker, seriously then, what is even worse at a time when the country is grappling with the clutches of hyperinflation, widespread economic hardship, all income increases, including the $500 given to nurses, Imani, $1,000 given to doctors, $50 duty allowance to provide a mere meager $50, the 25% one-off gratia payment to public workers, all will be subject to tax, and the Minister of Finance confirmed only recently in a program and talked the truth that it will be taxed. So unless the government changes position, all the workers increases. Anything given to them, the well-known $500. Mr. Speaker, the true question, as I said when I begin this presentation, who does this budget actually attempted to serve, Mr. Speaker? Question that everyone should answer. Mr. Speaker, sorry, watch the time. This decision is not just economically imprudent, those increases. It's a stark display of self-interest over the public good, Mr. Speaker. The increases to the ministers come at a time when the regularization of public sector workers is not marred with the natural retroactive benefits. which include pensionable years that are due. But current year regularization is the order of the day. That needs to be looked at, public workers. But current year regularization, Mr. Speaker, is the order of the day, Mr. Speaker. This, to me, is one of the biggest deceits of this government. But as long as we are on this side, we will expose those deceits. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance announced a number of increases over the plan at the end of the year. But the rule is there. It says the limits. So unless you're breaking the law, what you said in Parliament is incorrect. Unless you want to break the law, then what you're saying is tomfoolery, Mr. Speaker. It is not right, Mr. Speaker. We will. Today we see pension reform committee being established without the active participation of the unions. So they say. Today we see that the government has set aside funds to contribute to a pension plan that no one has any idea what it means. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, as I come to conclude, interestingly, yes, so. Mr. Speaker, it is well understood that management of the economy is about setting policies, making choices, and implementing policies that maximize the overall benefits of the people of Grenada, Carriacou, and Petite Martinique. That is what the management of the economy entails. It's about doing the greatest good for the greatest number. In this regard, Mr. Speaker, Matthew chapter 7, verse 15 sets up what we as trained mathematicians says. It's an interesting proposition. It states quite candidly, and I quote, "Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing. But inwardly, Mr. Speaker, there are ravenous wolves, Mr. Speaker." Verse 16 says, simply states, "You will know them by their fruits." Let me repeat, Mr. Speaker. You will know them by their fruits, Mr. Speaker. When this administration gathered and took more of the fruits for themselves by increasing the travel budget, providing 2 million loan to one person, another 1.7 million loan, as if it's their money, Mr. Speaker. These are not your money, it's the taxpayers' money. You're put there temporarily as guardian. Don't take it for yourself. The bank came from nowhere to a serious bank. When they build roads, Mr. Speaker, and other facilities for their own residents on the backs of the taxpayers, Mr. Speaker, this is a problem. When they increase their income by over 100% and made it tax-free, mostly so. When they make profits from the Citizenship by Investment program, for some of them, I say it's wrong. When they provide a tax break that can benefit members of cabinet, I say it's false and wrong. When they remove 150 from the poor and vulnerable, people who are suffering, the disabled and others, I say they have no conscience, Mr. Speaker. When they refuse to give the poor world workers a serious level of opportunities over the years, and the entire year, especially at Xmas time, when they could make the place look brighter, because they're the ones who spend the money. When they cut the givers programs and lower it. When they fail to introduce any new programs for the youths. When they fail to make the managers and contract workers permanent within 12 months of taking office. When they reduce the e-book program. When they cut the housing brigade program. When they increase taxes on gas, electricity, sugar, and water, H2O. When the fired workers, laugh still, fired workers and victimized workers, I say have a conscience, have a conscience. When they denied regularized workers retroactive pay and pensionable years as they promised, I say, have a conscience. When they see to it that little or no medication at the hospital, I say, have a conscience. As I reflected, Mr. Speaker, on the passage of Matthew 7:15 to 17, it dawned on me that it in this passage, that this might have motivated Maya Angelou, that famous black female giant poet who wrote, and I quote, she says, when people show you who they are, believe them, unquote. When this new administration shows you their true fruits, you don't have to guess what tree it came from. You don't have to guess whether they are sheep or wolves. Mr. Speaker, we know it because we feel it. Mr. Speaker, after years of sacrifice that led the Prime Minister to remark that he made a treasure full of money, it should bother us all, Mr. Speaker, to see that the Cabinet and select men and women align themselves to the NDC, living high of the fatted calf. No concern for fiscal buffers. No real concern, Mr. Speaker, for the productive sectors. To the youth who have become despondent whole string, God is not sleeping. He's there. And the New National Party is also there. To the civil servants, the police officers who are demoralized, Mr. Speaker, to the nurses who have given their professional lives building up the country, but who now cannot bear to serve out the year in mediocrity. The lack of professionalism, a broken system with demoralized staff, absentee ministers, and no accountability, the NMP and the people in this country share in your dismay. To the elderly whom you seek for some hope, don't despair. Don't despair. All is not lost. By the action of this administration, it's well known in the biblical statements given. But Mr. Speaker, by the fruits, as I said, you shall know them. Just remember always, God first, others second, ourselves last. In this stead, they have created their own dictum, me and me and me. Mr. Speaker, as we advance toward the celebration of our 50th anniversary of independence, we implore the government to remember that it has a sacred duty and a responsibility to all Grenadians, whether they voted for you or not. That's your responsibility. Mr. Speaker, as I move to conclude, I could never leave out the constituency of the people of Northwest St. George's. Mr. Speaker, the people who gave me their solid support
for all these years, knowing that I am not perfect, but they saw me as someone that is interested in themselves. Mr. Speaker, from the 70% support that they gave me when the New National Party split up in 3 ways, and technically I should not have won, but I got 70%. We had literally almost a destroyed New National Party. 70% to the 91% given in 1999. Those were the percentages, Mr. Speaker. I owe them a lot. And why I left a lot to be here, I have never regretted it. Because the love of people, the commitment they have shown to service, and the needs they have demonstrated for this country touch me, Mr. Speaker. For right through the constituency, no matter what areas, Mr. Speaker, I owe them all, Mr. Speaker. And I will never forget you. I will not. Long as I have the breath in my life, I will be there with you. Mr. Speaker, therefore, I am not here to be in fight with anyone. I'm not here to compete with anyone. Come and hear the battle between who and who. Me, my legacy is enshrined already. I've been to the mountaintop, Mr. Speaker. I've been there. Others have to start to climb, Mr. Speaker. They can climb, and I wish them luck. But fight with me? Don't use me to promote yourself. Go promote yourself for yourself. Not use my name and you and a clash with you to promote yourself. And when you do it and you do right, I give you all the credit. I give credit where credit is due, but don't use me. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, this is the Yuletide season. Christmas is here. I may not get the opportunity to wish all members again on the country. I will do it as the opposition leader showed in a statement for Christmas to wish all, Mr. Speaker. But I also want to wish all the members on the side, on the families, and the constituents, and the country as a whole, the best that they can have in this Christmas time. When we're here to put our ideas, to speak to issues that concern us and our people, Mr. Speaker. We hold no malice to anyone. I have never had in my bone, and my mother taught me so. Despite the attacks, the viciousness that I have passed through in the politics, I've never held that against anyone permanently. You get mad, yes. It's human to be mad. I've seen people come up here and say all kinds of things. Those I have done a lot for, they have been the most vicious against me. But that is the price one pays for service. And I have not said a word about them. And I could say a lot, but I am bigger than that. My grandmother taught me better. She told me, do not pay. Do not pay back what is wrong with wrong. Your conscience must be your guide. My conscience, Mr. Speaker, is my guide. And therefore, I want to wish all the best you can have for Christmas. And to thank the members on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, to thank them for their support. I know some of them want to create a real fight. Mr. Speaker, they want fight. The only party that know how to fight one another is the National Democratic Congress, Mr. Speaker. That's the only one that know how to fight. I've never fought in my life and I don't intend to fight now. That's the last thing, Mr. Speaker. But I want to thank them and to say to them, Mr. Speaker, my concern, as I said to you, I should not be here today. I am going to St. Patrick's to be along my brother. Someone was served me when I give my tribute today. It might be difficult for the tears not to flow, but I will hope not. Because he served with me. And he served the New National Party with distinction, Mr. Speaker. So I thank you all. I wish you all the best as we move forward with this budget presentation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And thank you to Honorable Leader of the Opposition for your contribution and response to this year's budget.
Take care. Take care. Okay. Yeah, see you. Yeah.
And let me just say, as we invite the next speaker,
NMP, St. George's to St. Andrews, St. Patrick's to St. David. Chantimel to Mount Craven, L'amour to St. Mark. We're on the road, NMP on the road, NMP guide us, we're on the road, go tell our enemies, NMP on the road, NMP guide us, we on the road, yeah. NMP guide us, be our guidance, make intercession for us. Hey,